Welcome to Caregivers Haven podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping families who are caregivers of a loved one with a mental illness gain peace of mind. Even though this is a podcast focused on family caregivers of the mentally ill, much of the discussion can be helpful to any caregiver. Your host is Sandra, your caregiver nurse consultant who, as a family caregiver, shares her passion for helping others and her lived experiences as a caregiver to provide education, support, and resources to other families. Sandra is a registered nurse and many of her guests are healthcare professionals. However, this is not a professional podcast, nor will be associated with any mental health counseling or medical doctor. Please seek help with a professional provider if needed.
Hey caregivers, how are you today? I'm so happy to be here, and I'm going to ask you the same question. Are you taking some time to rest, relax, and rejuvenate? Remember, we can't pour from an empty vessel. We have to take care of ourselves so that we have the energy to take care of our loved one. I'm so excited today. We have Jennifer Fink here with us. She calls herself the caregiver to the caregivers. After helping her mom, who had Alzheimer's for 20 years, Jennifer wants to share her knowledge with other caregivers. In May of 2018, she launched the Fading Memories podcast. And she's here today to share her caregiving journey with us. I'm so excited to have her. Jennifer, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you. Yes.
Terrific.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
I follow Jennifer on Instagram. I've listened to her podcast, and I follow her on Instagram, and she has these 3 beautiful golden retrievers. And so I always get excited when I see her post that has her dogs in there. It reminds me of my dogs. They're so cute. And she also shares stories about her mom, but I love her dogs.
They're my secret social media weapon.
Yep, they're very eye-catching. So this month is Caregivers Month. And so every month, Jennifer, I've had caregivers come on and share their caregiving journey. And I also heard that it's Alzheimer's Month, which I didn't know because I thought it was last month. I thought it was September. But I guess in September, it was like World Alzheimer's Month. But this month is our National Alzheimer's Month. Is that correct?
That's what I've heard. I'm going to have to get all those dialed in myself.
Yeah, that's what I saw. And I also saw that they use the color purple to show support. And for Caregivers Month, they also use purple to show support. So I'm just happy that I was able to grab you and have you on before the end of the month so that we can celebrate Caregivers Month and Alzheimer's Month on Caregivers Haven podcast. So thanks for being here. And so can you start off by telling us who you are a caregiver for and what illness they had?
My mom had Alzheimer's for 20 years. Her mom had what I believe to be vascular dementia. So this would be my maternal grandmother. She had in the mid-90s a brain aneurysm that leaked for 3 months. And they didn't think she would survive the surgery. It was like a 5% chance. And they didn't really discuss what might happen with my grandmother if she did survive. She did, because, my whole family's ornery. And she went down the same kind of path that my mom ended up on, the forgetting how to eat and all of those things that happen with people living with Alzheimer's. And just to add a little extra yay for my family history, my maternal great-grandmother also had senile dementia, which is what they called it back in the day. She died before I was born, so I never participated in caring for her. So I didn't take care of my grandmother per se. I did help out occasionally, but she wasn't super close by. I worked with my parents. We had a family business, and it became apparent that my mom's daffy moments, as I called them, were becoming more frequent. And as regular listeners of my podcast know, she would take orders from clients with no due dates, no directions, nothing useful to get the job done.
Oh, wow.
And it was very easy to dismiss those, especially that started about the summer of 95. She was 52 and a half, and she was off on Wednesdays because she had a women's service club meeting. So on Tuesdays, she would take these orders that would be due on Wednesday with no directions or due dates, and the client would come in and we'd be like, "Oh yeah, hi, oops."
And she wouldn't be there because she was off that day.
Exactly.
Wow.
And it's easy, obviously you're in a busy store or an office and the phone rings or somebody else comes in, you put the order down and then you forget about it and somebody else picks it up and is like, what the heck? But it happened more often. And I don't remember the exact year, but we had employees who would always get to the shop first, and I would look through I would look through all the orders, like what needs to be done today, get everything organized for the day. I believe the employees probably noticed that she had these quote unquote daffy moments because they would, this was a photography studio and 1 hour photo lab. And they would print all of the orders, but they wouldn't punch the wallets out. There was 8 on a page or 2 5x7s. They'd need to be obviously cut apart, packaged up and put in the pickup drawers for the client. So they would get it like 95% done. And she would, then we would have to do the other 5%. One day I came in, I looked, and I was like, great, there's one of these orders. I didn't catch her chit-chatting with the client, which if I had heard her doing that, I would go out to the front counter and be like, oh, so what are we doing for Sandra today? I try to be like nonchalant. And that way I didn't have to call people and say, oh, I didn't understand my mom's directions or, try to kind of bluff my way through.
Right.
And I was probably frustrated because that was just an annoying thing to have to do. And I held it up and I said, what am I supposed to be doing with this order? And she looked at it and she goes, I don't know. That's such and such employee's handwriting. Now, she and the employee did not have handwriting that was similar at all. And I looked at it and went, oh, fun. And that's when I told her this had to be somewhere 2002, 2003. And I told her, you're starting to have more and more daffy moments. You used to have a couple a week. Now you're having 2 or 3 a day. And I'm starting to get really worried. And she looked at me and she goes, well, I don't want to end up like my mother, turned on her heel and stomped away from me. And I thought, well.
Oh, so she may have noticed something too, but just didn't want to, she was in denial because she didn't want to be like her mom.
Exactly. And we never had conversations as a family about what was going on, what we should do. I believe my dad, who was her primary caregiver for, 15 years at least, I believe he was pretty typical and, just dealt with it. He, he had a lot of coping tools, reminder tools. He hated the way she Christmas shopped. She would go to the mall and search for gifts for me. And then a different day, she would go to the mall and search for gifts for my sister. Now, my sister and I are polar opposite personalities. I do not know how we are biologically related. So I can kind of understand why she would do that, but seriously, is it really that difficult to switch channels in your brain?
Right.
It's like, oh, Jennifer would love this, which means, of course, my sister would totally not. Or the other kid would totally love this, which would mean Jennifer would totally not. It's not that hard. So that's how she shopped and, whatever. She didn't ask him to go with her, so it really shouldn't have irritated him at all, but it did. As her disease progressed, he would do things like order things online, print out the pictures, write who the gift was next to it. But I believe he really felt that, he could handle it until I think he was between his chronic illnesses and her advanced Alzheimer's. I think he just really gave up because that's pretty much what he did is he gave up. His kidneys were failing. He didn't want to go back on dialysis. He didn't tell anybody that he needed to be on dialysis. So we went right into caregiving for the two of them. Like most of us end up in a big state of emergency. So it was not fun.
Exactly.
That was 4 years ago, almost this week, the 29th of November, 2016.
So you said your mom, so she had it for 20 years. Isn't that a long time? Isn't that longer than like the average time that someone has Alzheimer's before the end stages?
Yeah. And I think she actually could have lived longer, but she fell and broke her leg at in March 8th. And that was just one thing too many for her body. And that was March 8th. She broke her leg. She passed away on March 31st. I had commented numerous times I was ready for this journey to be over. And when it was over, I was like, well, holy crap, I guess I wasn't totally ready.
Right, right. You're not the first person who has said that. And sometimes people have a lot of guilt from thinking that or, wanting that. But to be honest, everyone just gets tired. Everyone gets to their point where they just feel like they can't, take it anymore. But then when it happens, we change our minds. So
I had a lot of the after guilt, like, I tried really hard to do nice things for her during the holidays. Last Christmas, obviously her last Christmas, but Christmas 2019, our city park has 24 Christmas trees that are decorated by various local businesses, groups, charities, what have you. Most of them have some type of theme, like if the Alzheimer's Association office was in my town, which it's not, they might decorate it all in purples and silvers and stuff that would represent the Alzheimer's Association, but still be pretty for Christmas. There was one tree that had it was from a local pizza parlor. So they had great big homemade cut out pepperonis and slices of pizza. Not typically very Christmassy, but I like pizza. So it was kind of a cool tree. And we went and we walked along the path, which was like a fabric over the lawn. And her visual processing was so bad that whenever the terrain changed, she would almost cartoonishly spin her arms and she'd almost go into panic, even though she didn't have balance issues. It's just like what her brain saw, what her eyes saw, her brain didn't process properly. So I'm pointing, we've got dozens of trees, at least 24, and I'm, taking her along and I'm showing her the stuff. I would take some of the ornaments off the tree and hold them up really close to her. And I later learned that it was probably super overwhelming because she kind of shut down on me. And it was so frustrating because I'm like, I'm trying so hard. And, why can't you just enjoy this? I'm not asking for appreciation or anything for myself. I just want you to enjoy it. And I remember thinking, that I didn't do enough. But after she passed away, I looked through all the pictures and videos that I had done of her, and I realized I did a lot. Was it perfect? No, but nobody's perfect. So it was kind of a wake-up call to actually look through all of the stuff that I'd taken. I realized after my dad died, that if we didn't do pictures of her, she would disappear from the family history, and I didn't want that to happen. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, it sounds like it is. So for those listeners out there, in case some people don't really understand what Alzheimer's is, especially when you're comparing Alzheimer's to dementia, which Alzheimer's is a form of dementia, but it's different. And dementia is not really an illness. It's kind of like symptoms. And I know a lot of people get that all kind of mixed up. So for our listeners out there, can you kind of explain to them what Alzheimer's is?
Well, it's a shrinking of the brain. So they call it atrophy. And it was very interesting because at her last neurology appointment, that's the better word, they said, well, she's got moderate shrinkage. And I thought, how much more could it shrink? Because as they progress through the disease, it's not just forgetting memories like what you had for breakfast or your relationship to this particular person that's standing in front of you. She always thought I was her best friend, which was actually quite easy to accept because I had lost a tremendous amount of weight as she was progressing. So what was in her memory wasn't the person that I looked like, now. But eventually they forget how to use the bathroom. They forget how to dress themselves. You may stick them in the shower and they just stand there looking confused, which it took 2 people to shower my mom because she wasn't super willing to have help. They forget how to eat. It gets very, very ugly. And one of the reasons I'm a huge advocate for showcasing what late Alzheimer's looks like, because people need to understand what their family member might be going through, what their neighbor might be going through, their friend, because it's not just forgetting where the car keys are or somebody's name, which I forget all the time anyway, or, what you had for breakfast that morning. When you can't remember how to get dressed or, how to take a shower, or, one of the things that it was a little bit difficult to accept is my mom would, obviously the care staff in the residence that she was in would, give her a shower, wash her hair, and they obviously didn't have time to style it dry. And obviously there's also some risks with using a blow dryer on an older person. It would be really easy to burn them, and then they could get violent. So it's like they didn't bother with blow drying her hair, and she would comb it straight down, and it was just, eventually she didn't even look like my mom. I mean, she did, but she didn't. That was really challenging.
Yeah, I know one of the things when I talk to people about Alzheimer's is exactly what you said. Like, you put them in the shower and they don't know how. So with dementia, it's a lot of memory loss and forgetting things. And with dementia, it's forgetting things, but it's forgetting the purpose of things. Like, you might have keys in your hand, but you don't know that those keys are to unlock a door. Or like you said, you'll get in the shower, but you don't understand that I'm in the shower to wash myself. And that's kind of one of the key differences that I noticed between dementia and Alzheimer's, or senile dementia, or, old age dementia, as some people call it. That's one of the big differences, that's huge. That's difficult. That's hard. Some of, like you said, forgetting how to eat, like those are just basic activities of daily living, and they just completely forget how to do any of that.
Some people,
which is why they need a caregiver.
Well, some people have a real serious personality change. There's a gal also following me on Instagram, and she's taking care of her mom. Now, she's a much younger person than me, which kills me because, I don't think 20-somethings and 30-somethings should have to stop working to take care of a parent, but that's a whole different podcast conversation for another day.
Right.
And her mom has gotten very verbally violent, is probably a bit of an overstatement, but she yells, and she gets very angry and yells and swears, and it just, a lot of times this gal, she lets it bounce off of her. She kind of shakes it off, but that's really hard when somebody says nasty things to you out of the blue. Like, all of a sudden they wake up and they're just in one of those moods.
Right.
My mom didn't get like that. She would get like that if she at the end, so about a year ago, even earlier this year, she used complete sentences or complete words, and she made complete sentences, but they didn't make any sense. There was no historical or grammatical context that you could like hang logic on. And if you scrunched up your face, like trying to figure out, what is she trying to tell me? Which I had originally thought of as being respectful, she would get really angry. It's like the scrunching up of your face, my face, triggered an anger response. And I kind of learned why that happened when I posted a video of the two of us at Pete's Coffee and Tea, and she said something, and I looked at the camera, was in front of us leaning up against the window, and I looked at the camera and kind of rolled my eyes, and then I shrugged my shoulders like it was supposed to be a nonverbal of, I have no idea what she's saying. Oh, well, that's Alzheimer's. That was what was going through my head. Somebody on Instagram saw it, and she's like, this makes me so sad that you're so angry with your mother. And I thought, angry? Is she insane? And I looked at it again through what I tried to, through this commenter's eyes, I'm like, I'm not seeing anger. So then I turned off the sound and just watched my face, looking for anger, and I never saw it. I chalked it up to this gal being kind of a little overly sensitive. She had lost her grandmother, who was also verbally abusive. So I just kind of chalked it up to that. But one day I made that face. My mom had been really chipper and happy and chat. And she said something really wacky. And I tried to put it into context with what she'd said before, which was stupid on my part. And she immediately went into mad at me. And I thought, whoa, she's seeing this expression of confusion as anger, like that person on Instagram did.
Yeah.
So it took a lot of personal strength not to ever make the face or the, what is she talking about? Scrunching up your face, like thinking face. It's kind of hard to describe.
Yeah. So it sounds like there was about 7 years from when you first noticed things until she was actually diagnosed. And then it sounds like your dad was a primary caregiver for the first 15 or so years. I'm guessing you and your sister helped during that time. So as a caregiver, what was your biggest fear in the beginning of that diagnosis? What was your biggest fear as a caregiver?
Well, she didn't get diagnosed until mid stages. By the time she was formally diagnosed, it was ridiculously late. She went through all the testing to donate a kidney to my father in the summer of 2008. She was denied being a donor because of cognitive impairment. So I was like, there we go, got a diagnosis. Well, after my father died in March of 2017, I was mom's healthcare power of attorney. So I was at the doctor with her, and I had let them know ahead of time when I made the appointment, when we showed up for the appointment, multiple times reminded them I needed to see her diagnosis because they never talked about it with me. And I assumed my sister, who's younger. And I was shocked to find out that it wasn't 2008 she was diagnosed. It was September of 2011. I was like, are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. Now, when you figure September of 2011, she passed away March of 2020. Generally, from diagnosis to death is 2 to 10 years. So she was at 8.5. So I assumed incorrectly that she had about 2 or 3 years left. She had just turned 77. She still walked. She still talked. Up until the very, very end of 2019, she seemed to have very little problems eating. That became much more of a problem from New Year's Eve till she passed away. And the care staff they just rolled with it because there's a lot of issues with, do you use thickeners? Do you feed them? Do you do this? And there's a lot of conversations about prolonging their dying and not providing a quality of life. But it's hard to know, like, at what point are they starting the transition, the labor of dying, and that's why they're not eating, or are they not eating because their brain is broken and they forgot? So I'm actually have done an episode on the end of life. I have to come up with a better title than that one. Nobody will listen to that one. And it's actually really, really fascinating because it's very difficult to notice the signs of the transition into the last weeks or months of your life because the dementia or the Alzheimer's hides it.
So what was your biggest fear during all the getting diagnosed and all that?
It was hard to know how to help. My dad he was like my mom, didn't accept help. My sister would make freezer meals, so she and a friend would get together once a month and do all the prep work. And then there would be like a frozen bag of like stew that he could throw in the crock pot and warm up, and various slow cooker meals. And I did what I could, but they really didn't want help. So I kept stressing about how do I help them when I'm 20 miles away and I have my own career and I have my own family and dad's not asking for help? It was that constant stress of I should be helping, but I don't know what to do.
Right. And I think that happens with a lot of people, even for someone who wants help, people still don't know what to do. One of the, I can't remember which podcast, or maybe it's on one of my checklists. I talk about, write down what you need help with ahead of time. So when people ask, you'll know what to say. You'll know how to tell them if they can help you, because a lot of times people want to help, but they don't know how to help, or, the people think they don't need help when really they do need help. So that I think a lot of people struggle with that. So along with your biggest fear, what was your biggest frustration at the beginning of all this?
That they didn't,
or was the same
well,
thing?
it was denial. I mean, when you hold up an order that your mother has written out, and she's saying, no, that's so-and-so's handwriting, and so-and-so has, loopy handwriting, and she had angular handwriting, and then she gets angry at you. It's like, why am I putting myself through this? And there was a point, I believe in 2012, I could hear the exhaustion and the frustration with my dad. My dad's fuse was way too short. She would ask him, what are we doing? And he'd say, we're going out to lunch with Jennifer. Oh, okay. 5 minutes later, what are we doing? And then he would just explode. It would just be anger. And that bothered me a lot, because then she would get pissed off at him. And it's like, none of this is helping, guys. And I didn't want to be a marriage counselor, especially with somebody who didn't have kind of had a broken brain. So I started searching around for an adult day program for her. And the only one that was close was probably about 7 or 8 miles away, but you had to pass, they lived across the street from an elementary school. Then you had to pass an elementary school, high school, junior high, and the community college to get to this place. So I had talked to them, and they said, well, she could come in as late as pretty much an hour later than they normally started. So I talked to my dad, and I said, I've talked to whatever the gal's name was at this place, and this is the activities they do. I think this would be really beneficial for mom, because she would have, she'd be around other people like her. So it would be very relaxing. There's mental stimulation, social stimulation, and you'd get a freaking break. And there, you can go one day a week, because at the time it was like $85. And I personally thought, my dad always talked like they had no money, even though their home was paid for and he had investments. I knew he'd invested a lot in the business that we had together. So they weren't super open about all their finances, which is pretty common. And I knew he wasn't going to want to pay $85 a day, 5 days a week. That's pretty pricey. But I thought, if you just have one day a week where you drive her over to this place, and then you can do whatever you need to do, or you can just go home and nap, do whatever you want. And he absolutely refused. He wouldn't even go talk to them, because I had set up everything. The next step was to go take a tour and yada yada. And I knew at that time that she was at the point that it was very beneficial for her, but if we waited much longer, it would be like dragging a 2-year-old to preschool. Except not mine. My 2-year-old told me that we could leave. Now my 2-year-old is 29. So it was just like, I'm trying to help. I'm trying to do what I can. And it was like banging my head on a wall. So it got to the point where my hair salon is in their hometown. So whenever I had a hair appointment, I would make sure that I'd spent time with them. And that was like once a month. And sometimes their doctors were over by my house. So if they were over that way, they would come have lunch with me. And that was the extent of the help that my dad accepted. I think, was it 2015? Might have been 2015 or 2016. I was putting up Halloween decorations, so it must have been late September, early October. They came over. They had doctor's appointments. They showed up at my house like almost an hour early. which threw me all for a loop. And my dad flops in a chair and he goes, "Your mother needs new bras. Can you take her shopping?" I'm like, okay, I'm like, I'm much more equipped for that than you are, So we
Yeah.
went.
So then, so he finally accepted some help.
Not really. It was more like, I'm not dealing with this. You deal with it. So I took her to Target. I needed to get something there anyway. And it was pretty much the closest place where I could acquire said undergarments. And she refused. She's like, "I don't know why." And I said, "Dad would like me to help you buy XYZ. So let's just do this to make him happy." Nope. It was like two stubborn 2-year-olds all the time.
So what, so normally, so now that you've shared your biggest frustration, your biggest fear, normally I ask people what is their biggest fear or frustration now. But since your mom has already passed on, I'd like to ask you, looking back as her caregiver, is there anything that you would do different?
I have learned a ton this year from my guests on my podcast. So I wish I had been aware of all of the educational opportunities and groups, etc., that I could have learned from. That would have made everything for me probably a lot easier. So that's one thing I do advocate a lot, is have these conversations early. I think that when you were talking about making a list of the help you would need, that was a post I put on Instagram last week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Really?
so it's a very good message. And those are the
Yeah, I have that on my checklist too.
It's like my husband and my daughter and I, we've talked about it. We know what, my wishes if I get Alzheimer's. My husband doesn't think he's at risk, even though, yes, he is. And we basically know that it's curtains if we get Alzheimer's. And I actually have, coming out the second week of December, is a talk with a gentleman that created an Alzheimer's living will. So I seriously suggest people check that out, because it does lay out what to do with somebody at the end of their life when they can't tell you. And you might have disagreements with your siblings. No, mom's at the end of her life. No, she's got more, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure you know how those conversations with family can go. So that's the first thing I wish I had done. I really wish I had known a lot more earlier on. It would have made it a lot easier to provide her with the adventures, the little joyful trips we took out watching children in the park or at the pool. Or I would have realized that looking at 24 different Christmas trees was overwhelming, and that's why she shut down and got nasty with me. That's not really a Christmas memory I would prefer to have. So it's, in between your podcast and my podcast, and this year a lot more caregiver podcasts have popped on the scene. So there's so many ways of getting information, even if you're caring for a loved one in your home or their home, and your time is there's just not enough of it, which all of us suffer from that. But family caregivers of people that, they're in the home with them, their time is so short that these kind of podcasts to me are just invaluable.
Yeah, one of the things you said that I stress to a lot of people is gaining knowledge is key. Education is key. Learning about the illness and then coupling that with finding support groups helps make it easier for everybody. I think those are two key things. I agree with you on that.
Well, and self-care is not sorry. Self-care is not selfish. And like what you said, is it helps everybody. So if you're helping yourself be, more loving, more patient, more tolerant, they're going to have a better quality of life for longer. And that's what we all want. It's pretty simple.
Right. And you're not going to get to that point if you don't have the knowledge. And that's, a lot of people don't even realize that they are a caregiver, which means they don't realize that they need to be practicing self-care. So then they never get to that. They're running on frustration and fear and anxiety. So it's difficult.
And
I have two quotes here that I want to read to you. One says, "Self-care is not about self-indulgence, it's about self-preservation," and that's by Audre Lorde. And the other one is, "Rest and self-care are so important. When you take time to replenish your spirit, it allows you to serve others from the overflow. You cannot serve from an empty vessel. And that's by Eleanor Brown. So since you just brought up self-care, I wanted to read those to you and tell me, what do those, as a caregiver, what do those quotes mean to you?
Well, the second one, when we're helping somebody, whether it's, my husband and I are Rotarians, and we pass out dictionaries to every third grader in our city. And that's so joyful. The kids love it. And even in this digital age, you think, well, the kids really don't need a dictionary, do they? And they love it. And we get the best thank you cards. When you reach your hand out to give, you can also receive. But if you're so exhausted and stressed and frustrated, you're going to have a very difficult time reaching out to give, which means you're not going to receive. And unfortunately, exhaustion and stress are toxic to our brain. So if you want to keep your cognitive health, you better make sure you're taking care of your physical self, because 65% of caregivers end up hospitalized or deceased before the person they're taking care of, like my dad. And
Right.
most of the time, people don't plan ahead for the caregiver to go first. You just assume the person with Alzheimer's will go first, and then you're in a bigger crisis. So
Right.
we're the ones that are living. We're taking care of somebody who is very, very slowly dying. And I think if we keep that in mind, as sad as that feels, my responsibility to my mom was not to prolong her life, but to make sure she had as much quality of life as possible for as long as possible. And when somebody else has to shower you and help you toilet and dress you and feed you, that is not a quality of life. And so we have to really understand that we're still living. And if we give up our life, even though we think it's temporary, it could be far longer than we think, and then we just burn the candle at both ends, and then we're no good to them or ourselves or anybody else.
Correct. And I've actually heard, you said 65%, I've actually heard that statistic even higher, as high up as 70% of, and I actually read that not only do they get ill, a lot of caregivers become mentally ill with anxiety and depression, like actual diagnoses, just from not taking care of themselves. So self-care is so important.
And it's very difficult.
It's
why I advocate strongly, when your loved one or you or both, when you get a diagnosis or a suspicion, because we all know that diagnosing a cognitive problem of any sort it takes forever. Write down like what you do every day. You make meals, you do chores, you do laundry, you go to the grocery store, somebody's got to take care of the yard, maybe you've got a dog that needs walking. All of those things are just daily living that we all need to do if we want to live. And then you add all the caregiving on top of it. So make this list of everything you do and start writing off. It's like, hey, there's a young teenager next door. Maybe they can mow the lawn. Maybe the old lady down the street who's just retired. I don't want to say old lady, but the person that just retired, maybe they can come, have tea with my wife, 1 or 2 afternoons a week, so that I can take care of paperwork or make phone calls or take a nap or whatever. And then as when you start putting that team together, they're familiar with what's going on. You're not trying to bring in somebody when your loved one needs to be showered and taken to the bathroom and dressed and is aggressive and swearing or scratching. Like that's not the best time to bring somebody new into the situation. So I am a big advocate of putting your care team together, and that doesn't necessarily mean somebody that's going to be hands-on with your spouse or your parent. It's people who help you navigate all of the things we need to do in life. I've talked to caregivers who are out of state that make phone calls to insurance companies, doctors' offices. I can't do that stuff. Like 2 minutes on the phone with those people and I'm ready to roll bombs through doors. I am dead serious. My tolerance for that is almost non-existent, and I'm aware of it and I know it. And so when it was doable, my husband, who is a real estate broker who had to deal with the banks during the foreclosure crisis, and all the banks on the East Coast would be like, we need an answer by XYZ today. And it'd be like, I just got up. Now I have like 90 minutes to get back to these people. And you spend 87 of those minutes on hold. He would just go about doing whatever he needed to do. I would have been like unglued angry by minute 7, just like, my tolerance for that is not good. So he would make those calls. And once it got to the point where they realized that he was not really an authorized person, then he would like basically put the phone on speaker and we would talk to the person together, which generally kept me from losing my cool. And somebody that, if you've got a child that lives across the country, or an aunt, or whatever, a friend, there's a lot of things people can do that aren't hands-on day-to-day caregiving.
Right, right. So I love that. I love that idea of putting a team together ahead of time, delegating some of those chores, especially ahead of time, because, I don't know what the thing is. A lot of caregivers, they love to care for others. They love to give. But when people offer them help, then they say, oh, no, it's okay. I think we know what a burden it can be, and we probably don't want to feel like we want to be a burden on anyone else. So I think just knowing that that's part of caregiving is putting together this team. I love that idea. So in addition to that, are there any other lessons learned or any other suggestions that you can share with caregivers, like just to help encourage, motivate, and inspire them? Anything else other than what you've already said?
Mostly to reiterate, definitely care team, earlier the better, because we have no idea what tomorrow will bring. If 2020 has not shown us that our Hellscape bingo card is full, then that I kind of equate caregiving that way. I mean, I never figured somebody lived 20 years with Alzheimer's. There's one other person I know of, I haven't met them, whose mother lived for 30 years. Now, maybe they go backwards and say, oh, okay, well, she has Alzheimer's. She was diagnosed in 95, but now we can see that we saw signs in 1990. I don't know if that's the case, because I have never heard of anybody more than me. I was always the champion at my support group because I was the youngest with the person who'd had Alzheimer's the longest. I always felt like I should get a prize. So you have no idea. You could wake up tomorrow and something happens, like they break a leg or something goes wrong. I mean, part of the aging process is our bodies just cannot cope with one more injury, one more, minor illness. And that's when everything just kind of goes haywire. I just experienced that last week. My oldest dog was doing great, and then he wasn't, and I don't have 3 dogs anymore. Sorry to break it to you.
Oh, wow. Just from talking to you the other day? Oh my gosh, that's so sad. I'm sorry to hear that.
And that's a perfect example. And planning ahead really helps. And I'm going to do an email, part of my newsletter is going to talk about this, but I'll share it with you guys here first. Planning ahead, Sandra said she's a planner. I'm a planner. So we're both probably going bonkers with this year because can't plan anything. It's very frustrating. The dog needed to go to the vet on my birthday, which was Tuesday, the 17th. My husband does Meals on Wheels. He said, let me call so-and-so. He can take over my route. I said, it doesn't take you that long. Just go do your deliveries. We had a special, it's a Wonder Fold wagon. If you Google it, it's this incredible wagon that's designed for children, but it worked great for geriatric dogs. We put him in the wagon and I hightailed it up to the vet. It was almost 2 miles, but I got my workout in. The dog enjoyed the roll. We got to the vet on time. And I kept thinking, because we had things in place to make caring for this geriatric dog easier, it made our life a little bit easier. And I rolled that dog to the vet twice last week. And it's just, and I kept thinking, if we plan ahead, like the Boy Scout motto, I think, I was never a Boy Scout, obviously, is to be prepared. Be prepared for anything to happen. They could wake up in a nasty mood and swear and curse at you, or they could wake up and jerk away from you and fall and break their leg, and 3 weeks later they're gone. It's just, you never ever have any clue what tomorrow's going to bring. So the more team you can put together, the more knowledge you put together, the better off you'll be able to weather all of these storms, which we've had in abundance this year.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. So, Jennifer, I have really enjoyed you being on the show today, and I really, really hope that you will come back and visit us at some point. You have so much knowledge and so much experience for all the other caregivers out there. And one of the things I'm finding out with my podcast, with Caregivers Haven, it started off as caregivers of family members with a mental illness, because that's what I am a caregiver for. My mom is also elderly, so along with that. But what I have found is that I am helping caregivers with all different kind of illnesses, because the caregiver, it doesn't matter the illness that you're caregiving for, the caregiver experiences all the same issues, all the same challenges. We are a group within ourselves. It doesn't matter the diagnosis, is what I'm finding out. So I really appreciate you helping other caregivers out there, caregivers in general, and also caregivers, families who are taking care of someone with Alzheimer's. You are very knowledgeable in that. I thank you. And for all of you caregivers out there, I hope you heard some of her tidbits that she gave out, planning ahead, being prepared, and gathering your team together ahead of time. And, just that's that delegating. When I talk about that, asking for help, we can't be afraid to accept help, or else we're not going to be able to continue. And remember, we cannot serve from an empty vessel.
That is so true.
So, yeah. So, Jennifer, thank you. And again, Jennifer's podcast is Fading Memories Podcast. Do you deal with mainly Alzheimer's on your podcast?
Basically, let me think. I'm changing the tagline. It was a supportive podcast for those caring for a loved one with memory loss. And now it is basically information, inspiration through conversations with other caregivers. So like what we're doing today.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, because you're probably finding the same thing that I'm finding, is that caregivers, we all have the same challenges. We all have the same issues that we're dealing with. And it's mainly just learning how to love ourselves just as much as that loved one that we're caring for, so that we can remember to care for ourselves. I think, that's the biggest thing. So, well, we're going to end now, and I'm hoping Jennifer will come back, and I hope you really listen to all these tidbits she gave us, and we can move forward and continue to be great caregivers. And please hold for a moment for some important.
Sandra is a registered nurse, and many of her guests are healthcare professionals. However, this is not a professional podcast, nor are we associated with any mental health counseling. Please seek help with a professional provider if needed. You can reach Sandra by listening to the podcast on the Anchor app and leaving a message there, or you can DM her on Instagram at Caregivers Haven. If you enjoyed listening to Caregivers Haven podcast, please favorite, subscribe, or follow on your listening platform.
Okay, guys, thank you for listening. And until next time, Caregivers Haven is wishing you peace of mind and happy Caregivers Month.
You can find Sandra on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Caregivers Haven. If you enjoyed listening to Caregivers Haven podcast, please share, subscribe, follow, and favorite.